The Man Everybody Was Afraid of, a Dave Brandstetter mystery. Book 4 in the series. Author Joseph Hansen. Publisher Open Road Integrated Media, New York. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 13. He woke when the ungiving little car began to jolt over potholes in the road through the eucalyptus grove. The crunch of peeled bark and dry seed pods under the tires was loud. In the midnight silence, twigs snapped. He straightened stiffly in the bucket seat, rubbed the back of his neck, worked his tongue around in a dry mouth. The steel glass of the phone booth glinted in the headlights for a second, and here was the wedge of bare ground with the dash lights in his eyes. He couldn't make out the campers under the trees, but there in the headlight glare was Tyree Smith's trailer on the point. Its door hung open. "We're here," Dave said. Cecil pushed the brake pedal. The car came to a halt, tilted in a rut. Cecil switched off the engine, and the thud and splash of surf reached them. Dave unbuckled his seatbelt and climbed out. Cecil cut the headlights. "No," Dave said. "Leave those." Cecil switched the headlights on again. Dave walked off. This shouldn't take long. He climbed bent aluminum steps and put his head in at the door. The smell was of mildewed cloths and moldy food. No change in that, but he didn't hear snoring. He pawed around for a light switch, and there didn't seem to be one. He stepped inside and flicked his cigarette lighter. The flame showed him an empty bunk. "Smith," he said to nobody. He went down the steps and squinted across the acre. Nothing moved. The big trees rustled in the gold breath of the sea. He walked around the trailer. The footing was bad. He twisted an ankle. He crouched. Under the trailer, the lighter showed him beer cans, blown wrappers, weeds. He put the lighter away, brushed sand off his hands. "Smith!" Somewhere, Cecil said, "Shit, oh shit!" Dave got to his feet. The headlights showed the boy's long legs and yellow jeans. He was standing on the point. "What is that?" He sounded scared. "Down there." Dave stumbled to him. Cecil gripped his arm. The long fingers pinched. "Man, what is that?" The black tide gulped and hissed around the rocks, and something floated on it, white and shifted. "That," Dave said, "is a sad old man in a sad old linen suit. He was tired of starting over. Help me down there." But when he got his rope soles planted on two rocks, Smith was still out of his reach. The headlight beam shot off to sea above his head. They only made it darker down there. The rocks were black to start with. He bent this way, that way, groping out for handholds. His legs were spread too wide. A bottle kept clinking. He couldn't see it. "I better come down," Cecil said. "Never mind," Dave said. "The police will have a grappling hook. Help me back up." They came without sirens, but there was no way not to hear them. Rusty manifolds roared, valves cluttered. A bent fan blade sang against a radiator. Their headlights flickered among the ragged tree trunks. They jounced on squeaky springs across the ruts and rocked to a halt beside Dave's rental car. Red lights blinking with sleepy menace on grimy white roofs. 4 pale uniforms stepped out. The men wearing them were young. One was Jerry Orton. They hadn't brought a grappling hook. They used ropes, and they weren't good at it. Right away, one of them fell in. He slogged disgustedly back to his car, where he wrapped himself in a blanket and sat hunched up, trading talk with a radio that hissed and crackled under the hulking blackness of the trees. Light went on in. One of the campers, a gray woman and a bald man, both in new bathrobes, climbed out and stood close together watching. From the next camper, a pair of plump young people, long-tailed plaid flannel shirts, lard white legs, came out, peered with pinched, unbelieving faces at the shouts and movement in the headlight glare on the point, and went back inside. A small dog bolted out of the third camper, streaked across the open ground, yapped hard at the uniforms, and turned and scooted for the camper again with its ears laid back. A woman's voice said, "Bad dog," and a tiny door slammed. They emptied the water out of Smith, but it didn't help. He lay on his back now in the weeds, roped under the shoulders. his bones showing sharp through the wet white suit. His teeth were lost. His jaw wouldn't hold his mouth closed. His mouth was a soft black hole. His wet white hair lay all but transparent on the delicate skull. Next to it, one of the uniforms set down an almost empty vodka bottle. Dave stood out of the way as he'd been ordered to, back by the rental car. Cecil sat on the fender and shivered in a thin, yellow windbreaker, and suddenly the bald man in the new bathrobe was with him. "He was always drunk," he said, staggering around out here, "singing all night. The wife and me couldn't sleep." "Look at it this way," Dave said. "Neither could he." Cecil said, "Tired of starting over?" "He had talent," Dave said, "and no one noticed." "Not for singing," the bald man said, and walked off. A car arrived that was not like the police cars. It was wide and new and hardly made a sound. It was a Mark V, painted dark metallic gold. A man in a white Stetson got out of it with a doctor's bag. He wore big wire-frame glasses and bushy sideburns. His Levi's were saddle-worn, and his cowboy boots were clotted with manure and straw. He knelt by what was left of Smith. After a busy minute, he said something to Jerry Orton that made both of them laugh. Orton walked around the big car and opened the trunk. The man in the Stetson picked Smith up as if he were sticks and straw and carried him to the trunk and laid him in it. He slammed down the lid. The wind had picked up. Whatever he shouted as he got into the car was blown away. The broad back of the car had many red lights. They winked out, one by one among the trees. The wet boy kept battling the static on his radio. One of the dry ones coiled the ropes, levered up the bent lids of the patrol car trunks, and dropped the ropes inside. The third boy climbed into the trailer and used a flashlight. Jerry Orton came to Dave. He seemed to do fine without sleep. His childlike blue eyes were clear. His shave was close. Every short golden hair on his head was in place. His uniform was crisp. "I want an explanation," he said. "Years ago," Dave said, "a friend called me at night. I went back to sleep. When I got to his place next morning, he was lying in a bathtub, and all of his blood was in the water." "Not about Smith," Orton said. "He got drunk and fell off there, and he wasn't a friend of yours. His kind don't have friends. I don't care about him. Crazy old drunks are always dying on the beach. I care about my wife, and mother, and sister." Orton looked at Cecil. "Okay, kid, the excitement's over. You can go now." Cecil looked at Dave. Dave nodded an eighth of an inch. Cecil slid down off the fender, got behind the wheel of the rental car, started the little motor, backed the car in a half circle, and drove it away through the trees. Orton said, "Does Medallion Life Insurance Company know you're out of your mind?" "You could ask them tomorrow at 9, Dave said. "Because," Orton said, "the things you told my wife tonight are insane. My father prowling around in hippie clothes and dark glasses with marijuana in his pocket. For God's sake. My sister running around with a jigaboo convict pretending to be kidnapped and ransom note in my father's closet. My sister's brand new car down in the ravine." "Have you looked in that closet?" Dave asked. "Frances phoned my mother. She looked there. Nothing in there but my father's uniform and 2 suits." Dave listened to the sea splash on the rocks. "My father wouldn't wear out shoe leather hunting for a man just released from Soledad. He'd go through channels. I've had the department phoning Lester Green's parole officer. Last I heard, he wasn't home. But we'll keep trying." "George Anderson," Dave said. "He'll tell you Lester is at his mother's place. That's what he told your father. And your father went there looking for Lester." "Is that what Mrs. Green said?" Orton asked disgustedly. "Because if she did, I know exactly why. It was what you wanted to hear. That's how she is, a very old-fashioned black lady. Don't cross the white man, boss. You leaned on her. Don't say you didn't." "What about the marriage license?" Dave asked. "My father's got friends on the Sacramento force," Orton said. "One of them will check the state records tomorrow. But I can tell you now, there won't be one. It's all in your mind. Why would you want to marry Lester Green?" "To spite your father," Dave said. Orton barked a laugh. "You don't know Lester. I've known him since he was 4 years old. He was scared of his own shadow then. He never changed. He knew how my father felt about blacks. I don't care what Anita would do. Lester Green wouldn't. Then why did he end up in jail? He was caught with stash, Orton said. What's Anita's car doing by his mother's house? It's finals week. Why isn't she at college? We went and looked in that ravine, Orton said. There's nothing down there but wild cucumber vines. Orton squinting at Dave. Did you really think you could get away with this kind of harassment? Is Medallion that tight for money? You had to drag that car out with a wrecker, Dave said, unless you know of an auto parts supplier open all night. The distributor head for that car is in my motel room. I not only have a witness that the car was in the ravine this afternoon, this whole area saw it there on the late news and heard it was registered to your father. Pictures can be faked. There was a sharp cry. A gull swooped close to their heads. It beat its wings for a second in the glare of the patrol car headlights, then vanished in the dark. So you've got Daisy Flynn in your pocket. What else is new? Your mail, and you're trying to smear Ben Orton. Naturally, she'd go for that. Believe me, viewers aren't going to take it seriously. Wait here. Orton walked to the car where the radio was squawking. He spoke to the boy wrapped in the blanket. The boy rolled up the window. Orton came back. Dave said, Your mother drove by Ophelia Green's house this afternoon. When she saw me, she hurried off. Why? Ophelia Green doesn't have a telephone. My mother's housekeeper is sick. Ophelia worked for us years ago. Mom thought she might be willing to help out a few days. Orton snorted. Sure, she hurried off. She'd had enough of you. Your father wore those hippie clothes, Dave said, to the natural foods place. He offered that pouch of marijuana to anybody who would lead him to Lester Green. Don't believe those freaks. They hated my father. He didn't burn down the underground paper to keep Eddie Sushak from printing the truth about what happened to Lester Green and why. Be glad nobody else heard you say that, Orton said, and listen to me good. My father was the law in this town. My father would never break the law, no matter what it cost him personally. You wouldn't be able to understand this, but I'm going to tell it to you anyway. Ben Orton was an honest man, decent and upright and moral, and that was how he raised me, and that's why you make me sick. While you were up in that canyon with your wrecker, Dave said, did you happen to stop in at Mrs. Green's and have a chat with Anita and Lester? I left word with your wife that I thought that might be a nice idea. They're not there, Orton said. What about magazines? Dave asked, with words clipped out of them to make it an authentic-looking kidnap ransom note, just like on TV. I told you, Ophelia Green is an old-fashioned black lady. She can't read. What would she want with magazines? Didn't your father tell you, Dave asked, tampering with evidence is wrong. Wrecking motel rooms, slashing tires. What the hell are you talking about? I can produce film of one of your officers slashing the tires of my car early this afternoon at the Bayfront Motel. He was wearing shades, but I think it was the one in the trailer. Orton turned and shouted, Thompson! Into the dark. The boy with the flashlight appeared in the doorway of the trailer. Orton motioned to him. He came down the bent steps, shut the trailer door, and crossed the rough ground. Jesus, what a pick pen, he said. There's no point in going through that junk. Just shovel it out is all. Would you explain to this man about those slashed tires this afternoon? He owns the car. You should have reported that, sir, Thompson said gravely. I was sure you would, or I'd have looked you up right then. What happened was I saw someone acting suspicious in the motel garage. I parked my car and got out to investigate. He saw me coming and ran. I chased him and lost him. I went back to the car where I'd seen him. I inspected it for damage or signs of attempted break-in. What make of car was it? Orton asked. A new Electra Silver. The tires were slashed. I took the license number. I filed a report. I believe every word, Dave said. Thomas struggled to keep a straight face. Is that all? He asked Orton. Orton said it was, and Thompson grinned at Dave, the way he'd grinned from his patrol car that afternoon, and went back to the trailer. Orton turned to Dave. I told you this morning, he said. Your only business in La Calita was to get my mother her insurance check. I can't do that, Dave said. Not if she conspired to in your father's death, and I think she did. You broke into her house. I could lock you up for that. You can't prove it, Dave said. You could sit in jail a long time while I try, Orton said. Only I don't want you in jail. I don't want you any place around here. Where I want you is back in Los Angeles. You go now, tonight. If you don't, you're going to hate yourself in the morning. Goodbye, David said, and walked toward the trees. The plastic glasses of wine glinted dimly on the pale rectangle of the chest under the splintered mirror. So did the wine bottle. So did the drop-jeweled glass that had held the water with which he'd washed down the pills. The torn loaf of bread squatted there on its flattened paper sack, but the manila envelope with the retouched photo of Ben Orton was gone, and so was the gremlin distributor. Head from the closet, where the curved fragments of the broken lamp base lay white and sharp in the dark. Dave took his suitcase, opened it on the tussled bed, and began to empty the drawer where Cecil had neatly folded his clothes. I hope, he said, you weren't planning on entering the film you took today in the Cannes Festival? Because I don't think it's going to be around even long enough for a re-showing on the morning news. Cecil brought Dave's shaving kit from the bathroom. If you expect me to ask you what you're talking about, forget it. He laid the kit on the bed and got the suit from the closet where he'd hung it. Where are you going? If you'll drive, Dave said, to Los Angeles. Whither thou goest, Cecil said. There go I. It will be boring, Dave said. I'll be asleep. It won't be boring when you wake up, Cecil said. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.